Thanks everyone for joining our webinar today. This one is all about cloud cost confusion, and we'll be talking about how to break down the barriers so that you can achieve a better cross-team alignment between your finance and engineering teams. Our speakers, first I'll go into the webinar a little bit, and then I'll introduce our speakers for you. So we'll basically kick it off with a little introduction about our speakers, a little bit about Kubecost. Then we'll be covering, the why, why cross-team alignment is important, and kind of break down some of the issues that we've uncovered here at Kubecost, and laying out a better FinOps practice. Then we're going to kick it over to Jesse, who's really going to, talk at more of a high level about really understanding some of these costs from the engineering perspective, just to get a better handle on what the engineering teams need and what sort of things that they're looking at to kind of, provide better context into how this plays into those cloud costs. And then Mike will kind of review how we translate that information for finance and operation teams. And then we'll kind of end it with, how you achieve that alignment, and then getting started with implementing some different practices for governance and cost management practices. And then we'll also leave some time at the end for a Q&A. So we did get some pre-submitted questions we'll go through. So if you sent any of those, we will be covering them, but we also have the Q&A option here on the Zoom meeting. So feel free to submit any questions you have throughout, and we'll try our best to cover all of those as well. So next, I just wanted to introduce you to Mike. So he's our Director of Finance here at Kubecost. He has been working with early stage tech companies for a long time. He handles all of our day-to-day management for finance as well as RevOps. And he has a lot of expertise in, SaaS metrics, equity management, and FP&A. I did drop a link here to his LinkedIn. So if you want to connect with him and learn more, or send him a message about how you can learn more about what we're working on, feel free to connect. And then we also have Jesse, who is our engineering manager here at Kubecost. He has over a decade of experience in application architecture and cloud computing. He's also a certified Kubernetes administrator, and he has vast experience across all the major cloud platforms. So those will be your speakers today. And with that, I'll go ahead and kick it over to Mike and Jesse.
Great. Thanks, Dee. Quick intro on Kubecost. We started in 2019 as an open source tool to give developers visibility into Kubernetes spend. Today, we empower thousands of teams across companies of all sizes to monitor and reduce waste while balancing cost, performance, and reliability. Whether you're using AWS, Azure, GCP, or even Kubernetes on-prem, Kubecost gives you a single pane of glass into your costs and enables you to make educated business decisions that you can feel confident in. We're currently managing over $3 billion in cloud spend. Companies like Adobe, Audi, J&J are using Kubecost to untangle cloud bills, take advantage of optimization opportunities, and ultimately hold teams accountable, which I think we can all relate to. We've got about 75 Kubernetes experts at Kubecost and across the globe. Excited to partner with you as you take this next step in your journey. But enough about us. We'll get into the webinar. All right. So cross-team alignment. Why is it important? I've been doing early stage tech for about 15 years now. One of the huge changes that I've seen that I just think is really interesting to set the tone is that finance used to serve as kind of like a procurement when we were buying servers. Like we get a chance to go through and, price things out and compare things and understand what that trade-off would be in buying servers. So we were really like the first line to talk about this stuff. Now it feels like we're the last to know. We get our AWS bill at the, on the 5th of the following month, and we're kind of just like, what did we spend money on? I think the other interesting thing from a finance standpoint is a software company like Kubecost or similar, about 75 to 82% of our costs are generally people costs. Software engineers, that kind of thing. The next biggest line item is almost always your cloud costs. So that ends up being the second most important thing that we're talking about from just like a dollars out perspective. Just makes it a huge topic of discussion for us. So on the left here, we kind of have some FinOps principles. Basically some building blocks on what we're going to start to do, and hopefully that leads to to some success markers. So the first thing is unified goals, aligning finance and engineering teams, and just ensuring that we have similar objectives. I think a lot of times we have different motivations, but we obviously want the business to do well. We also want cost efficiency. Like if you're an engineer building something, you want to build it in the most efficient way, but we also are thinking about reducing waste, and then ultimately leading to strategic decisions. So if we can nail the unified goals, the cost efficiency, that should lead to some more strategic decisions down the line that we can prepare for. All right, so common challenges that I personally run into in my career. The first is communication. As a finance person, I will admit I don't understand all of the technical challenges. I think it goes beyond that too. It's like, hey, a customer had an issue in the middle of last month and we had to spin up resources. So for me to see that bill 30 days later is sometimes really difficult. Try my best, but there's just going to be some limitations there. And then I'm also sympathetic to what engineering is thinking about. It's like, oh, the accounting and finance people are mad at us again because the AWS bill was 20% over what we said we'd spend. So they're trying to make some technical decisions that are important to the product, make a resilient app, make performance the number one thing. So they're not always thinking in financial terms, which is understandable. And then priorities, like finance has this budget. We have all these puzzle pieces, and we've decided at the beginning of the year that the puzzle piece for cloud spend is going to look like this. And then it changes, right? And so we still have to fit that into a budget. We have to make everything else work, which is a lot different than what engineering's doing, right? Like kind of talked about, performance and innovation are going to be the number one things. And then inefficiency. So just lack of visibility into cloud costs. Who's using what? How is it being used? I know that's common frustration even on the engineering side, but on the finance side too. It's like I in the past have asked like at other companies, hey, we spent 300K on cloud costs. Like, can you give me some color on what we bought and how this worked? And a lot of times it's like, oh, we just like needed the resources. Like we just had to use them. So I think those are a handful of challenges that, we always see. So with that, there's a lot of opportunities here. I think optimizing cloud spend is one of the biggest ones. You have tools, you have frameworks, you have cultural changes you can make, improving communication, like all those things can lead to optimizing spend. Transparency. I think a lot of times for me personally, the AWS bill is a black box. It's like, hey, we paid for AWS last month, we paid Snowflake usage, and we had some GCP, and those are like my 3 data points. So I think getting more transparent data on what we were actually spending is super helpful. And then collaboration. So, building a shared language, a shared framework, like how are we going to get this done? Finance understanding engineering, understanding finance is all a big piece of it.
Perfect. So, just to talk about this from the engineering perspective, I think engineering is very broad. So we'll talk specifically about software engineering. I mean, I think that that's majority of the cloud costs. But even within software engineering, we have both teams that are responsible for creating new software platforms. We have teams that are responsible for maintenance of those platforms. And then something near and dear to my heart, which is quality assurance of the software product itself. And all of those teams have somewhat different goals, but a lot of the same goals. I think the mindset of almost every engineer I've ever met is that they want to get their stuff done quickly and they want to be enabled to do a good job. And that relates to FinOps very closely because a lot of times when you are trying to solve a software problem, you need a significant amount of resources to do it because you don't want to develop something that only fits your development environment. It needs to go into the real world with, potentially very large data sets that, your laptop is not going to be able to handle for development. And so, like I said, most of the engineers I work with, they get very frustrated when resources to do their job are not available. Obviously, there's some balance there, and we'll talk a lot more about where those pros and cons are for very very tight cost controls versus potentially happy employees. Other engineering, I guess, trends we'll talk about in this. I work at Kubecost. I've been using Kubernetes for the past 5 years, and I don't see a slowdown in the trend towards more workloads moving towards Kubernetes. I have spoken with some very, very large tech companies, and I've spoken with startups, and every single one of them, their go-to development platform for future projects, if not all projects, is Kubernetes. For those that are less technical, I realize this is a FinOps, DevOps presentation. Kubernetes is the thing that manages virtual machines where we're deploying our code to run our software. And so it used to be you'd spin up EC2 VM, which is AWS's term for a virtual machine. For those of you, that's the one I default to. I do use all the clouds pretty regularly. Like Dee said, I won't even give away which is my favorite cloud platform. My wife works for Oracle. I see quite a few of our customers using Oracle Cloud, and they're seem to be up and coming. But anyway, I see the trend towards Kubernetes continuing, and what that enables is a lot of automation and consistency across environments that our teams are using. And there's quite a bit of challenge to getting up to speed with this automation. I'd say it's very easy for an engineer who has access to the cloud to go click create on a cluster that provisions a whole bunch of machines that we're now going to pay for, and they can quickly get their job done, but they may forget to delete this cluster when they're done, and they may, on top of the fact that it may be over provisioned for what they actually needed to do. And so the trend towards automating those environments, a term that I've heard is a development environment as a service. There's good companies that are doing this where you have a self-service portal. You go to it and you click the type of work that you need to do, and then it provisions the right amount of workload for the right amount of time based on the things that you're needing to do. And so the more of those, I don't know, automated tools are available to our engineers directly, the better we know where the costs are going, why the costs are going there, and that the resources were used efficiently. Moving on to the next slide. Mike mentioned this earlier. We engineers don't like to wait, whether that's for our jobs to finish because we had a too small of resources in the cloud, or potentially the environment takes a long time to spin up, so we just leave it running overnight. And there's balance there, but the agility comes with a cost. I think there's some alignment between our teams in terms of, like, we're a startup and we want to move fast and deliver great software quickly. And so maybe we err on the side of resources are always available. We don't want our engineers to wait. There's other customers that I work with that are very cost conscious. They spin down environments on nights and weekends religiously. I have immense respect for that and the amount of maturity that they've had around cloud spend. and the fact that they rely on Kubecost to help them understand what that trend looks like is really insightful for me to see what they're doing. So examples of costs outside of the things I've just talked about, like as much as we can plan for these environments that we need to meet our goals for our product development, there are going to be times where something went wrong. It caused new expenses. An example I can give there is one of our customers deployed a workload that had a lot of log spam. And so many customers and are very security conscious. So they send their logs to third party, whether it's Splunk or Datadog, something like that. And they charge per log per minute. And if you deploy this new pod that has 1 million lines a minute going to Datadog, there's going to be a really large bill at the end of the month. And if you wait that long, there's a problem. So the real-time visibility, we'll talk about more also, is critical. I need alerts about these anomalies as quickly as possible so we can figure out what caused the problems and address them. The other area that I would say could be a planned cost, but could be infinite in spend, is a QA matrix. If you have a product that runs on a lot of different platforms, let's just say OpenShift and GCP and Azure, and you could deploy it with a million different settings like our product does, then you want a lot of environments that mimic those customer environments. So when we release a new version, when they get hands on it, it works correctly in their environment. But to mimic all those environments is an enormous amount of cloud compute, whether there's just the different providers or the amount of size of the data sets we're talking about. Yeah, there's a lot going on. So we have tools that help us automate these tests. It's actually from a company called Replicated. Their tool, every single time we check in new code, spins up a very clean environment, make sure that at a minimum, we can still deploy, and then we have a more intensive regression testing as it gets closer to releases. But again, I think that the underlying theme here is simply understanding all of the different teams and the goals that they've got and why they're going to need to spend these resources. I think I pass it off to Mike next. I see there's a Q&A here. I'll just bring it up. Is this being recorded? And D, if I don't know if I see the recording. Yep, it is recording. I see it now. Sorry. And it will be shared, and we will share the slides as well. For those of you not already aware, we have a Slack publicly available. So not only can you connect with us on LinkedIn, but everyone at Kubecost is available. Just connect with us there. And the links are all over the web. You just type in Kubecost and Slack. I'm sure you'll find it. Go ahead, Mike.
Cool. Thanks, Jesse. All right. So I'm going to talk on the finance side on a handful of things. Just connecting engineering to finance and some things you can do there. I think the biggest challenge, kind of alluded to it earlier, was that as finance and accounting folks, we close on a 30-day cycle. So every month we're closing probably, about now, right? It's July 11th. We're closing June right now. And we're really starting to dissect like what we spent in the previous period, which is a challenge, right? Like Jesse's talking about a log issue that was like instantaneous that causes a spike in costs. And we're looking at stuff like 30 or 40 days in the past. So at a minimum, like how do you close this gap on like the knowledge and make those cycles a little bit shorter? So starting from a handful of things, but I think the first is to work on a shared language. We've both talked a little bit about the challenges from the finance side, the engineering side. I think from the finance side, it's like learn to explain what you need in a non-finance accounting way, but also like do the work to understand what engineering needs and talk to them out of interest, out of empathy when things go wrong, that kind of thing. The second is set some tangible finance goals to start. I find it a little easier once you establish some shared language. Hey, I'm trying to do X, Y, and Z so that I can push it to our financials. Like, how would I do that from a cloud spend perspective? Like tee it up, make it easy for engineering to be able to understand the problem and come up with a solution to the problem. The next thing is just connecting everyone, socialize FinOps throughout your org. We'll talk about some concrete ways to do that, but it's like, how do you get engineering, finance, anyone who's interested in this, DevOps, FinOps folks, all in the same room and talk through this in a productive way. And then finally, I think once you can measure a lot of this stuff, an important part of it is to celebrate the wins when you really are achieving some efficiency, making some progress on your costs. I think it's just really important to wrap it all up and celebrate those wins. Yeah, Dee, if you want to pop to the next slide. So shared language, I just want to talk about real quick. Jesse, do you want to say something?
I was on mute and I forgot. But I was gonna say I do like it when we share wins. Like Mike's not always the bad guy, which Mike, you brought up the term cost police to me. I've never ever thought of anyone in our FinOps team as cost police. I always look at them as our team that's helping us manage our spend here, and I don't keep that close an eye on it, and I'm glad someone does. And so anyway, yeah, the wins are great to celebrate.
Yeah, totally agree. Helps connect the team for sure. So I just want to talk about shared language real quick. So from my perspective, when I'm talking to engineering, I found that like, hey, why did you spend so much last month? Or like you blew the budget. Like those just don't help. And I think if you can tailor your questions, your interest in the spend a little bit differently, like rather than dollar spend, I like to talk about usage, resources, like, do a little bit of research understanding and approach a problem like that. Or, hey, not like the budget is completely blown, but like, hey, did you change something in regions? Like, did we have a customer issue here? Just like the spike in mid-June looks unusual. Like what was going on there, that kind of thing. But I think we also have on the finance and accounting side, we have a responsibility to use approachable language in a similar way. Engineers are smart, they're interested. I find that if I can like break things down, they'll hear us talking about budgets and forecasts a million times and no one will ever say like, what is the distinction here? So it's like forecast, that's where we're headed. Budget is where we want to go. Or something like cost of goods sold. Something that I take for granted because I think about it all the time, really just an incremental cost for each customer where we pay for their hosting, right? Just like a credit card fee, every time they swipe their card, 4% of that is a cost of our goods sold, same deal. So if I can start to explain those things in a way that makes sense, I find asks tend to be a little bit easier. So we'll talk about that in the next slide. So once you've got your language down or you're working on it, I mean, I think that's always a continuous thing. Like personally, I'm always working on the technical terms in cloud, but also trying to explain the finance terms in easy to understand language. I think that sets a tone for the ask that you want. So I'll use a couple of examples here. But once the engineering team understands what I want out of cost of goods sold, this is my ask. Like, hey, I want to be able to take $1,000 of cloud spend and I want to pull out the percentage that is the cost of goods sold. So I can put that right next to our revenue. I want to take the rest of that, I want to put it next to our development costs. So pretty simple objective here once you ask that way, and then we can come up with a plan. So for us, it was, hey, we can book all of our hosting costs to this specific account. Then at the end of the month, you can send this to accounting. They know exactly how to make this journal entry. Done. And then you can start to like really pull it's another data point in pulling interesting things out of that. It's like, oh, our dev costs were down, our hosting costs were up last month. You can start to see some of these patterns. And that makes it easier to discuss rather than just like a block of cloud spend. Another thing is like, hey, I want to see what each customer is using as far as like the hosting costs we pay on their behalf. Like, do we have customers that just like aren't profitable? Like maybe we need to move them to a higher pricing tier because they're using so many resources, or are we like, good, like this all makes sense, our margins are pretty solid there. Just as a way to approach unit economics. And a plan for that could be, hey, we're going to just start tagging all these customers. We'll be able to pull a report with this on who used what in the month of June. And then you can do your analysis after that. So simple asks, I think, start the process of the conversation, then coming up with a plan on like, is this technically feasible? How would we go about it? Yes, let's do it. So I talked about cost of goods sold, labeled as COGS here. Talked about cost of goods sold as just one thing. And I just like, a lot of times with these conversations about cloud costs, it's really hard for me to understand until there's a super specific example. So that's what I'm going to try to do here. So my ask was, hey, can I pull out cost of goods sold from our cloud spend? And everyone was like, yeah, we can do it if we make a couple changes, put it into this account. So that's what this looks like for 1 month. Basically, we have all of our development costs, our development accounts, and as production accounts labeled here. And then we have our cost of goods sold, that second one down. And all I'm doing here is pulling out our cost of goods sold as a percentage of our total spend. We spent 72K. We had almost 17K in cost of goods sold. And then we had 55K in development costs. I can send this to our accounting. We built a process with a journal entry. They can pop that into our accounting system. Done. Recognize that. And we also have some backup for it, right? Like really nice to have this reporting where it's like, hey, how, like if we're in an audit or something like that, they're like, how did you come up with like splitting these costs apart? And it's like, oh, we actually have it all saved. Here you go, can send it to them. Super helpful. Was always a difficult thing for me in the past in finance. And now, you start to make some progress and see those changes from both the analysis and just like the record keeping standpoint.
So while we're on this slide, and sorry if I interrupt you, but
Okay.
you have 2 questions. I'll answer one just while we're looking at this graph of Kubecost. Is a specific Kubecost question. I think that this graph will help with the message, or with the answer anyway. And then the one for you is, could you explain an example of COGS again?
Yeah. Can I start there?
Sure.
So cost of goods sold is anything. I actually like to use manufacturing in this example if I'm just talking to anyone, but basically it's the cost to make a single product. So if I'm making this mug here, it would be like the cost of ceramic would be a concrete cost. That would be a cost of goods sold. With software, it's a little tougher. It's like, you have to be able to tie that incremental cost back to a customer. So say I'm hosting the Zoom and Zoom is saying it was $1 in hosting costs for us to put this on. That would be a cost of goods sold. Another example would be a customer swipes their credit card and 4% goes to American Express. That 4% would be a cost of goods sold. So it's basically like a direct customer cost as opposed to an indirect customer cost, like, oh, we were doing R&D on a general product, right? We can't tie that back to a specific customer, so that's going to be in a different part of our accounting system. So really just like a specific cost for a customer would be cost of goods sold.
And I mean, just on the cost of goods, from my perspective, one like a concrete example that I would give, which we have a lot of service providers that use Kubecost to help understand what their cost per customer is. And so all of the things, let's just say you have a software that's hosted in GCP, just to use a different cloud provider for a second, and you store their logs. We're gonna be a Datadog competitor for a second. So we're storing all their logs in a GCP cloud bucket. And we have a UI that's run on top of Kubernetes that gives access to be able to dig into these logs. So the cost of goods for each of our customers that are sending us their logs is the cost of the storage of that bucket. It's the cost of the compute that their web instance is using, if it's just like a single tier application accessing this cloud storage bucket. And Kubecost, like in the screenshot we're seeing right now, could say, customer 1, 2, 3, and what their costs are over time, even just filtering down to that specific customer. The other question we got, where I think that this graph might be helpful for just kind of articulating where this webinar is not specifically about Kubecost, but because there's a couple of questions that came in ahead of time as well as one right now, I will address them. And so the question is, Kubecost obviously can provide visibility into costs over time, but can we give you a visibility into how much costs have been reduced because you are using Kubecost, right? So what is the ROI if I were to buy an enterprise license of Kubecost potentially is the question. And there's a couple, first of all, because cloud costs change over time just based on demand, it's not like 100% Kubecost is going to be able to tell you that dollar figure. But what we can do is show you how efficiently your resources are being used. We do this out of the box. There's nothing special that you need to do to enable it. And a lot of times when customers install Kubecost, you'll see, oh, we're at 5% efficiency. And I'm not joking that it's single digits. And when you see that, or FinOps team sees that, like, well, what can we do to increase our efficiency? And that can be tracked very distinctly within Kubecost. And so if you get up to some of our more mature customers are in the 70% efficiency range, it'll vary by your product and the amount of risk there is to slowness and how much resources it consumes and the variability there. Right? So 70% is not possible for all Kubernetes environments. So that's the point I'm trying to make. But if you move from 5% to 25%, that's still meaningful. And yes, that is absolutely built into Kubecost. Love to chat with you in more detail. Our sales teams are fantastic in showing examples of this. Just reach out and we will schedule a call, and one of my peers on the solutions team can give you more specifics. And I'll let you go back to the slides, Mike. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Jesse. All right. So socializing FinOps within the org. We'll talk about some specifics, but just some broad things that I found are do's and don'ts useful. I think hosting a monthly FinOps meeting is really helpful. I think it can come from engineering, it can come from DevOps, it can come from finance. Doesn't matter who starts it. I think the important thing is get a handful of people from different teams who have some influence. And then the monthly meeting is good. It's a great start, but I think you want a faster cadence to kind of solve for that 30, 45 day problem of information. I think at least weekly automated reporting for a finance team is really helpful. We can start to detect anomalies on our side from the spend, going up, down, sideways, whatever it is. And it allows you to become a detective. You can be more proactive rather than saying like, hey, you blew the budget from June. You can say, hey, I noticed last week there was this unusual spike. Can we talk about it real quick? That way you can note it, you can put it into your financial close as some color on like, oh, hosting costs went up a little bit because of X, Y, and Z. And then I think as you build this, you can understand when savings is happening, you can ask about it, and then you can tell that story for engineering, which I think is important. Kind of like we had touched on earlier about telling a saving story and like celebrating the wins. By doing some of the stuff, you understand when it's like, okay, we really did see some efficiency, we're spending money well, we can celebrate this win. So I think it's kind of like on finance to make sure that story gets told. The don'ts, Jesse mentioned it, but like I never want to become the cost police. I think I love the term from engineering, like blameless retrospective. Like I think everyone's got the best intentions. If something happens, it's all good. We'll figure it out. But at least we talked about it. We kind of set the foundation for the next time it'll happen. And then don't let your reporting become a wall of shame. Like I know that we can strike fear in the hearts of people when we come with an Excel spreadsheet with like a bunch of red across it, and it's like no fun for anyone to just be like, "This was your fault." We're way over budget. So I think I try to avoid that as much as possible personally.
Yeah, and I would say the first bullet on get all stakeholders in a meeting. I think the fact that it's literally everyone involved with cloud spend at Kubecost is invited to the meeting. And so I can learn from other groups on how they're saving money. I might be able to give advice to them on what we've done to solve similar problems. And beyond that, it's just being able for the FinOps team to share the goals. And then it's not just tell Jesse to spend less money. It's, hey, I love to know what our trend is going to be here so we can budget accordingly. Where do you see this going? And it's to Mike's point, no one's blaming us for spending this money. It's literally we are a company aligned together and we want to, use our resources as best we can. And so I think obviously you don't want 100 people in a meeting because it might not be very efficient, but for us, 8 people, 10 people, I think is fantastic.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. All right. This is a template that I use to run a FinOps meeting. So just like super specific, like I do it half hour a month minimum. Invite the folks that I think are important. Anyone can come. And this is my template. I can probably make it available if anyone's interested. But basically how it works is it's an Excel Google Sheet where one tab has our financial forecast data in there. And then I just move it up for each month. So we're going to talk about, this is just a May example. I put some numbers in here. So it's got our forecast straight through May. And then it's got our actual cloud spend through May as well. And then I've got some variance reporting, and this just all gets dumped into to like a CSV. And then I can do all the analysis in it, but super simple. We can see forecast versus our actual spend. On the right side, we've got a summary of just like monthly, so you can start to see trends. So I've got our cost of goods sold split out. I've got our dev cost split out. And you can see like, oh, I remember April, we onboarded a bigger customer, so we expected that, but then it went back down in May. And it's got all that data there. We could do some stuff by teams. If a team has realized some savings, it's like, hey, what did you do? What'd you do there to kind of realize that? Or if they're behind, it's like, oh, we upgraded some clusters to improve performance. We should see that down the line. So just a one pager there. And then on the left side, I will usually talk to a handful of like engineering DevOps folks about it. And I'll just say, hey, like, what was your impressions of May? This is what I have from just like a dollars and cents perspective. Can you give me some color on like trends, changes? There was an outage, or we had a customer emergency, we had to spin up some resources, all this stuff. It just helps to add like 5, 6, 7 lines of like some wins and then some opportunities. What are we looking at the next handful of days? I find that this is a good way to kick off the conversation. It just shows like what we've been doing, what our dollars have been, like how our spend and usage has been moving. And so that'll take the first 15 minutes. There's a ton to chew on here. And then the next 15 minutes in a FinOps meeting will be like strategic, what's going on now? What kind of things are we wrestling with? What do we think for the next couple months? What opportunities are there? And like Jesse kind of mentioned this, like if we have a handful of teams in there, folks can like learn from each other. Like Jesse may come in and say like, oh, have you thought about doing it this way or that way? Or, helping a team out with something that they had already done. So I think there's like interdepartmental things that you can wring out of it where everyone's kind of talking about similar problems, but then also it's just like a good check-in for everyone. And this slide is great because I can send it to pretty much anyone in the org, and it's like really straightforward. It's like, okay, so I see finance had 168K budgeted for it. We spent 173K. 3% seems pretty good. Like we're there. Or sometimes maybe it's like way off, right? It's like, does finance need to be informed better for this forecast? Like, does their guess need to be a little bit better? And we need to work on that. Or is there something going on with our spend that's like way out of line? So I love doing this because it just feels like it's not an I mean, it is an Excel spreadsheet, but it's a little bit dressed up with some more information, and it gives a lot of context for how we've been performing. Obviously it's backward looking, so start with the backward looking, and then you can kind of like inform the forward looking past that. All right, I think we can pop to the next one. Jesse,
Yeah, so yeah, this wrap, I think we're, kind of moving in to close this presentation here. Let's just start by talking about how we are getting there. Right? I think this is a journey, not to be too cliche, but for us, it was starting with monthly meetings and inviting everyone to that meeting and setting the table up front with the goals, and both from the engineering perspective as well as the finance perspective. I think that was really helpful for me when just to understand why we're doing this and how it's going to impact our business going forward. The stage 2, I think real-time cost tools generally are that they're great if you have discipline and you can look at them potentially every morning. I think that automated tools where they send you anomalies specifically are the best. And if not, simply sending a daily report of what was yesterday or what was last week, those are all available within Kubecost. Again, not a product pitch here. You can get very similar, if you're worried about your AWS bills, they've got real-time dashboards as well. But to earlier point that Mike made, if we wait 40 days to evaluate, if Mike just assumes that he sees this new service that we're running, that it was needed for customer X, where he's heard that there's some issues there, like it might not be, and it may be far more expensive than I anticipated. And if he sees it in a real-time dashboard and brings it to my attention, we all win, right? So wasted resources happen all the time. Just like some of the worst behavior I've seen at a previous company is that you could just spin up resources in the cloud, and there were like clusters and virtual machines with people's names on them that hadn't been employees at that last company for months, if not years. Now the security risks to whatever the heck is running on that. So like beyond FinOps conversation, I think, you need to sometimes just shut things down and see what happens if you're not sure. We've had some good success there, but when you do have these a better cadence with the broad teams and start asking pointed questions on what these resources are, there's a real amount of savings that are available.
Yeah,
go ahead, Mike.
I was going to jump in, and like I've been at orgs where the engineering has literally like never seen the total spend from the previous month, and this would be like over $250,000 a month for like a relatively small organization. It's just like 300K every month, and like you ask questions and everyone's like, well, we just needed it, that was it. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, and one aspect of Kubecost that I will bring up is that Kube is in the name. We're very focused on that, and the granular ability we have to give cost into Kubernetes specifically. Like I know GCP and AWS has some functionality that give like a namespace cost over time. Kubecost can tell you if you have a label inside of a container for which customer the cost should be associated to for your cost of goods sold, we can get to that level of granularity down to a single container with a single tag on it. And so these tools, you know, are really part of the whole story if we're going to be effective. You know, Excel in itself isn't going to do the job. We need something that we can drill in to details and find out, you know, not only what the costs actually were, but how efficient those things were when they were being used. I'll move on. In terms of governance, the best companies that I've worked for, Dee, if you'll move to the next slide, I've had the ability to create what I need and build a solution on demand. But that isn't enough in this world. Like we have customers where not only will resources get spun up, they'll be forgotten. And even if that employee is still here and they see Jesse's got his name on this resource, it doesn't mean that I'm still using it. And so the automated tools were self-service, and we can set dates and times that these things need to be used or how long they expect to be used for, really helps the FinOps team understand what our budgets are going to need to be long term. We've talked about a lot of these, so I'm not going to repeat myself too much here. What else are we missing? I would say I don't want to talk to slides. We've already gone in depth on all these topics. So we'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, so I think this is the last slide here. This kind of just wraps it all up, the process in action. So for our org specifically, we don't have designated, I'd say FinOps and finance procurement are a little bit the same. PM and then engineering all have a separate role. And some of those inputs, you know, optimization reporting, opportunities for savings, how feasible is it? And then build that all into an output like a benefit report, and kind of like think about it as cyclical, where we're making these cost savings, we're building the groundwork for it back into a budget that's approved, and kind of like create that process of kind of like rigorous cost optimization, and then like understanding how that ties into your budget. So this is just a quick slide to talk about the roles, the inputs, how we define that, and then the ultimate outputs of that.
Yeah, one role that is not, it's kind of implicit, but the team that manages the cloud product. And so if we've got Kubecost SaaS, the teams that are managing that are, number one, the customer success, we call them at Kubecost. And so, you know, is customer one costing us more than the revenue we're getting from them? And so that persona that's managing our specific COGS, and a lot of times it's a joint relationship between product engineering and FinOps to understand specifically what customer one costs us. But you know, the customer success is probably at least that term we use here, part of this matrix. But yeah, to your point, Mike, I think we have one more question here that came in live. Can dashboards be customized by origin, or do we have organization, or do we have to go through Kubecost organization? I'm not sure I understand that specifically. The Kubecost product wise, you can create dashboards for any team, customer, product, that you want. It's just a matter of, I think one thing that maybe I'll just put this one to you, Mike, but like tagging of resources is obviously very valuable when it comes to being able to get granular detail for what some cost is there. Do you have strategies for how to get people actually to use tags?
Oh man, that's a really good question. Yeah, I think it's like, to me, that's such a building block of how to report and measure resources. Because like, how many times would you have it where it's like, this is, no one knows what this is. Oh, we're on like a cost savings tear. Go just like delete it, and then it's something that's important. So it's like, yeah, I would love to save money if we're being inefficient, but I would also hate to kind of like cut something off that's really important. So I think it's like, to me, it's like a tools issue, but it's also a cultural issue of like, hey, can we just everyone have some responsibility here to be able to do this? And like the customer that you mentioned earlier, like they spend resources down every night, every weekend, like to get to that point, how cool is that? I think, like we deal with the same problems. Like we're a relatively early stage company. We're not super mature. So like I think a lot of times we err on the side of deal with a fire and throw resources at it rather than like dial in perfect unit economics. So I think like for me, it's a constant process. Like I don't think it's gonna get perfect overnight, but like yeah, the ideal is everything's tagged. I can pull reports based on it. I can quickly find out information based on those tags. But I also don't want to say it's an overnight thing that you can do. Like I think it takes work, it takes change. And it's easier said than done sometimes, but yeah, super important in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I like the threats from engineering leadership that we had one
Yeah. I get,
month.
and the same thing. It's like no one wants to be the cost police. Like no one
Yeah.
wants to be the tag police, right? Like you have to
No,
do it. You have to be, disciplined. But yeah,
so the VP of engineering here, my boss, is he said anyone that doesn't have an owner tag on their cluster by the end of the week, that cluster is getting destroyed. And so that's one way to get your clusters tagged. Depending on your risk tolerance, maybe that's not the right strategy for you, but small company worked well for us. We did save quite a bit of money the next week.
Great. Thanks both. We did get some pre-submitted questions, so I want to make sure that we covered a couple of those. But we do have a couple minutes left, so if you did have other questions that popped up, feel free to add those to the Q&A button as well, and we'll try to get to those. So the first question I have is for Jesse, and it is, how can Kubecost help me enforce policies to restrict cost increase according to predefined budgets and make sure that the resources are tagged? Which we kind of covered that a bit with the last question that you covered, but maybe you can explain a bit more about how Kubecost can help enforce some of those policies.
Yeah, so by default, Kubecost is a read-only utility. We give visibility into costs and how efficiently resources are being used. There are tools that we have in Kubecost, which we call actions, that can assist in automated savings. At present, we don't have an automation for shutting down something that's over budget. We do have budgets though. So you can create a budget for a team based on a monthly, weekly budget. The resets on whatever day of the week you want, whatever first of the month you want. And so you can say namespace 1, which is application team 1, should be less than $10 a week. And we will report on that for the course of the week, and you'll see whether or not you're on target and what the projection is. That's the budgeting already built into Kubecost. The tagging aspect of that, I'll say that Kubecost is reasonably good at telling you who's not adhering to the tagging strategy or the labeling strategy within Kubernetes. And so when you're in the RUI, again, this is not a demo or product pitch, but if you aggregate by your custom tag, we'll call it product team, and then you see an unallocated resource, there's a team that's not following your tagging or labeling strategy, and you can go hunt them down. And if you're very risk tolerant, go delete their namespace because they forgot their tag. That's just one strategy. For the most part, I think that the DevOps tools, they all allow you to annotate or label your workloads as you're deploying resources, whether it's a cloud specific or Kubernetes specific. And the customers that we have, they're the most sophisticated in terms of their cost management. They are amazing at making sure that everything has the appropriate tags. When I go to their Kubecost UI and I click on show me owners or cost by owner, there's no unallocated costs. And it's got people's names associated to those costs. And so they're doing it right. And they're not a small company. If I mention who they were, you know who they are. And they're spending tens of thousands of dollars a day in the cloud. And that's how successful they are. So it can be done.
Great. I think we have time for one more of the pre-submitted questions. So I think this one will also be for Jesse. It's more Kubecost related. Can Kubecost container request right-sizing work in conjunction with Flux to apply those changes via a branch or pull request to the source GitOps repository? What is the difference between database retention support and Kubecost API retention and the AWS documentation about cost monitoring?
Sure.
Kind of a loaded question.
No, I love it. I mean, the first part is, in my opinion, the best way to manage efficiency within Kubernetes is to set resource requests appropriately. And just to make a really easy example for non-technical people, if I have got a workload and I have no idea how much memory or CPU it needs to run, I'm just going to set a really large number on there, and this thing's going to be 5% efficient. We see it all the time. For the customers that are getting up to 75% efficiency, they are having their CI toolchain do a query into Kubecost API and says, what should I set the request for this resource to based on a profile, whether that's high availability, development, or some custom attribute that you're looking for. And we will give you that number, and you can set it real time as you're deploying your workloads. And that is very straightforward. I think there's even a really old example. By that, I mean 3 years old on our website for how to do that. But anyone that knows how to use JSON in a query can do it. The second part of this is like a licensing question for Kubecost. So Kubecost free is limited to 15 days of query history. If you run a query for 16 days, it will fail. All the data is still kept. If you want to access that by a license, you'll be able to query, I say infinite history, but we're really about a year. And I'll stop there because I realize we're at time, but thank you, Dee. Go ahead.
Yep. Thanks everyone for joining today. So we did record this recording, so I will send a copy of it out to everyone via email after this call. We'll also share a copy of the deck. And if anyone is interested in getting access to that template that Mike showed, we can also get you set up with a copy of that. But as always, if you want to learn more, feel free to reach out to us, and we're more than happy to set up a demo and kind of talk through some things more deeply with you. And our email is team@kubecost.com.